experiencing some technical difficulties. We want to shrink down the demonstrative slide. So I still need to see myself. You're not the only one who's vainglorious, Governor.
I defer to you, Mr. Chair.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you guys for being here pseudo on time. It's doing well. Thank you very much. We're here today. We have one bill hearing. We have 35 witnesses. We're here today to hear on House Bill 549. I believe we have a small panel to start. I would ask you to go ahead, introduce yourself. Mr. Governor, it is my honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. It is an honor to be in your committee. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm honored to be here joined by our Secretary of Labor, Secretary Portia Wu, and also our Baltimore County Executive, Johnny Olszewski. And we are thrilled to be here to testify on behalf of this bill. For the record, my name is Wes Moore. I'm the 63rd Governor of the state of Maryland. And I'm, thank you very much. I like how your committee works, Mr. Chairman.
Discipline is a hard thing to find amongst the elected.
And I am very excited to partner with each and every one of you as we continue to move progress for every single Marylander across the state. As I crossed the state during the campaign, I spoke to voters about our work, wages, and wealth agenda. And I want to spend a second just to tell you a little bit about what I mean by that. That our state is a wonderful place to live, but too many Marylanders are still struggling just to get by. Too many Marylanders aren't able to build generational wealth, to lift their children to the next rung of the economic ladder, to own more than you owe, to pass something off to your children besides debt. Too many entrepreneurs struggle to get their businesses started and to grow them, and we can and we should do better for all Marylanders. I believe that we can be a state that lifts up both workers and businesses. I believe that we can help families thrive economically and help businesses to grow. Those who say it's either one or the other are frankly offering a false choice. And importantly, the data does not support that false choice. My legislative agenda rejects that false choice. It proposes new investments in Maryland's economic competitiveness, including proposals to expand broadband infrastructure, to keep highly trained military retirees in the state, and to invest in our innovation economy. These proposals will help Maryland businesses to grow and support the next generation of small business owners. This agenda also includes proposals intended to help struggling families across the state and lift children out of poverty. Proposals like this one, the Fair Wage Act, which is a cornerstone of our effort to end child poverty. We know that this bill, this legislation, reinforces the fact that no child, and I mean no child, should be worried about where their next meal is coming from or whether their family will have a roof over their head. But currently, more than 150,000 Maryland children live in families led by wage earners who make less than $15 an hour. These are people who are doing it right. These are people who are working hard. And they're working in some of the most challenging conditions in our state. They're simply trying to build a better life for themselves and their families, and they need a little extra help to get by. These same families have been hit hard by the aftermath of COVID. They've seen their cost of living go up as a result of disease and war. The $13.25 per hour that would have meant so much to them a few years ago means less today, when goods as basic as eggs and milk cost so much more than they used to. As the cost of living continues to increase across the nation, Marylanders cannot wait until 2025 for a $15 minimum wage. The Fair Wage Act proposes that we accelerate the minimum wage, accelerate the increases that have been planned over the next couple of years to help families catch up, and the legislation increases wages for approximately 217,000 Maryland workers and helps 151,000 children see an increase in their household income. The Fair Wage Act also indexes minimum wage to inflation. Now, the indexing is a common sense policy that's been adopted by states across America. And these states, by the way, they represent both blue states, like New York and Colorado, but also red states, like Alaska and South Dakota and Ohio and Arizona. They've adopted indexing already because their household income will keep pace with inflation. And, importantly, businesses will get predictability. Indexed increases in wages are smaller. Business owners know when they are coming, and they can plan around them. And frankly, as a former small business owner, I know one of the most important things for us was basic predictability. And this bill helps to do that. That's exactly what indexing offers. In crafting the bill, we kept the needs of both workers and businesses in mind. We spoke to organizations representing labor and organizations representing businesses. In my administration, everyone is going to have a seat at the table. And while we believe deeply in accelerating and indexing the minimum wage, our bill does include language that serves as a hedge against severe economic turmoil. And that is why we are proposing a 5% cap on indexing. And also, and by the way, and that brings further predictability for the businesses. And also, we're proposing language that would allow for the Board of Public Works to temporarily pause increases in the minimum wage if necessary. But make no mistake, without indexing, Maryland families will fall further and further behind over time. If we do not ensure that minimum wage keeps pace with inflation, it will be worth less in 2029 than it is today. And I just wanted to give the graphic example that we laid out here. If we can just expand that and show that, just to give you an idea of why indexing matters. And you see here where the chart shows about what we're proposing with the indexing and the steady and predictable line for the indexing, which is the top line over there, versus the line that goes in the 4 o'clock direction. That's what it looks like without the indexing in 2029. I've had the opportunity to meet with many small business owners across the state, most recently last Friday and also this morning. Some of these businesses, because of the labor market, are already there. Some of these businesses, because they are focused on bringing in dedicated and the most committed and consistent employees, are already there. These employers want to help their employees thrive and live more prosperous lives. And these employers also know the truth that a little extra money for their employees will go right back into the economy and serve as an economic stimulant. Our state is expected to see a total annual increase in consumer spending of $216 million that will go into our state's economy as workers use this extra income. This is how we help our people flourish, and this is how we help our businesses grow. And I also wanted to say in closing that in crafting this legislation, I also couldn't help but think about the person who inspired me to get into public service in the first place, who was my mom. And my mom did not get her first job that gave her benefits until I was 14 years old. My mother did not get her first job that allowed her to work one job instead of multiple jobs until I was 14 years old. Did not get her first job that gave her reliable hours until I was 14. And I also want to remind people that this is a woman who went on to earn a master's degree. That job that she got when I was 14 years old, that didn't just change her life. It changed the trajectory of our family. This legislation is not just how it impacts the now. This legislation is about how it's going to impact Maryland's future. Among those things means getting a basic raise. And when we think about how this legislation actually impacts people, 58% of the people that are going to get a raise from this legislation are women. We must make sure that we can keep population groups like women, people of color, and young people engaged in our workforce so that they can help us to continue to grow our economy. This committee hears so many important issues, and I thank you for providing me the opportunity to be here today, and I thank you for the opportunity to listen to me today. My administration is excited to work with this committee in the coming years, and I urge a favorable report on HB 549, the Fair Wage Act of 2023.
Thank you, Governor. I know we have a panel, so before we have any questions, guys, I would ask that we complete the panel. County Executive Johnny Olszewski. John.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the Economic Matters Committee. For the record, my name is Johnny Olszewski, Baltimore County Executive. I want to first thank Governor Moore and his administration for stepping forward, not just on this issue, but for other issues that are critical to advancing the value of work and the value of our people. Both this critical Fair Wage Act of 2013, but also issues like the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit. Collectively, they represent a true commitment to the workers of our state. I also want to thank the Secretary and fellow panelists to come for their commitment and leadership on this issue. I'm proud to have been one of your former colleagues, having served in this very committee as I ended my tenure in the Maryland House of Delegates. In that time, we were there, and we raised the minimum wage then. We fought for and didn't pass while I was a member, but later passed things like earned sick leave, so that families weren't choosing between caring for their family members or working. And it was this body's decision to further increase the minimum wage to 2015. But the fact that we're here again also is proof that we need to continue in our work to support workers. It's proof that despite progress, the need remains. And it's a reminder of why things like indexing moving forward makes sense, so that we don't have to keep coming back and having these same conversations over and over again, so that workers don't lose relative wage gains against inflation. I want to applaud the governor and his team for putting in both flexibility with the Board of Public Works and also a cap, so that there is that reliability for employers. In Baltimore County, I'm in charge of a more than $4 billion enterprise every year with thousands of employees. And we are proud that we have found a way to pay our workers more than $15 an hour, all workers, in our current budget. We did it because it's the right thing to do. We know that too many of our neighbors are still living paycheck to paycheck. We know that things have not gotten easier. Almost everything is more expensive. These are the same people who are having to make the difficult decisions and sacrifices for even the most basic of things that we all take for granted, like putting food on the table. And for those who are willing to work, we have a responsibility that we collectively value that work and our workers. So we're here in strong support of House Bill 549 to help make sure Maryland families can make ends meet, to reduce the financial strains facing the working poor, and to invest in the very greatest asset that we have in Maryland, our people, preserving the dignity of work. Again, I thank Governor Moore, his team, and other supporters, and respectfully request a favorable report on House Bill 549. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Madam Secretary.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Portia Wu, Acting Secretary of the Maryland Department of Labor. At the Department of Labor, we work to benefit all Marylanders by removing barriers, opening doors to opportunity, and supporting economic growth. I just want to share a few points that underscore why, from the department's perspective, we believe this legislation helps to further those goals and makes strong economic sense for Maryland. First, as the governor noted, this legislation benefits workers. One of workers' greatest concerns now is keeping pace with inflation and rising costs. We all know when workers struggle to make ends meet, they cannot, not only can they not support their families, they can't focus on career advancement. Wages that keep up with inflation not only help workers to support themselves and their families, but also provide stability so they can seek greater opportunity through training or education. The legislation also benefits Maryland's businesses. Higher minimum wages are associated with lower turnover and greater worker productivity. Higher wages also encourage individuals to return to the labor force, which is critical given the shortages we are facing. Most importantly, gradual wage increases pegged to inflation help businesses to plan ahead and can help support a virtuous cycle of more stable jobs, more available workers, and improved productivity. Finally, a strong minimum wage will help our state to stay competitive. By passing this legislation, Maryland will be keeping pace with leading states. As the governor already noted, 19 states and the District of Columbia have already passed laws indexing their minimum wages. I want to note this is also becoming the norm in our region. In the Middle Atlantic, nearly half of the population, half of businesses are already living in states that index or are soon to be indexing their laws, and that ratio will go up to nearly 2/3 when Maryland joins their ranks. I also want to note we've seen no demonstrated negative employment effect. Indeed, by some measures, indexing states have grown faster in recent years. For all of these reasons, I believe an increase in indexed minimum wage will support a stronger and more competitive labor market. And I ask this committee for a favorable report on House Bill 549, the Fair Wage Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and I appreciate your economy of words. Governor, I do believe, I know we have Eric Lukey and Miles Hicks. Would you like either of them to testify before we begin to ask questions? Eric?
Mr. Chairman, I'm just here for questions, and Miles can come up on the next panel.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. All right, colleagues, this is an opportunity that you have to ask questions, so now's your time. Go ahead, Seth.
Chair, I was here for the negotiations on minimum wage. Like many of the people you see before you, communities, workers, businesses, unions had a voice at the table there as well. This is settled legislation. I'm concerned we're setting a dangerous precedent in which we go back and sort of get what we didn't want the first time. You know, we did a lot of work. Many people that you see before you hear did a lot of work, and everyone had a voice at that table. And we passed a good product, whether you voted for it or not. A lot of folks in here we passed a good product, and it was one that we generally agreed upon. It passed the House, it passed the Senate. You know, and to my recollection, during COVID, you know, it's not just the folks that were being hit, it was the businesses as well. And I will just say this, in my communications with the former administration, including Kelly Schultz, not once did off-ramping minimum wage come up, because businesses wanted to ensure that people were going to get those steps during the most critical times. You know, and so that off-ramp was already built in to the legislation. And the business community never, as far as I'm aware, and I was in regular communication, especially during COVID, never asked to freeze those minimum wage increases. So I mean, this is settled legislation as far as I'm concerned, Governor and panel. People worked very, very hard. The business community is very, very sensitive to the needs of its workers, as demonstrated by the not asking for any type of off-ramping during something we haven't seen since the early 1900s in the Spanish flu. I just would like to hear a response to that.
Thank you so much, Delegate. And I can respond first, and then I open to the panels. I'm deeply cognizant and also respectful of the amount of work that went into the piece of legislation before. It's an important piece of legislation. And frankly, when you look at how we're approaching this piece of legislation, the Fair Wage Act of 2023, it models that, right? It models it in making sure that all people and all segments and sectors of society are around the table and are part of this process and helping us to get to the final conclusion. The thing that we do know is that we have the legislation that is in place, but there have been very real dynamic shifts and changes within our society that have to get factored in. So while we have something that is settled legislation, it's always important to be able to have a sense of where the economic winds and tides are going and making sure that we as a government are being adaptable and that we're being responsive. When that piece of legislation was pulled together, you're absolutely right. There were certain things that we did not see coming, to include a global pandemic, which knocked people out of work, which closed businesses. And now that we're watching a reopening of businesses and industries and entities, and we're watching greater measures of inflationary pressure that are continuing to sit upon Maryland families, it's important that we as a government are also responsive to that. And so that is why we're working in partnership with employers, with labor, with workers, with everybody around the table to ensure that while we believed, and I think, again, a lot of work went into the legislation that pushed 2025, but there's not many people who speak to either on the business side or the worker side who believe that there's not need to be not just a measure of acceleration, because economic shifts have moved so significantly, but then also the basic cost, the basic purchase power that $15 was going to give that person has continued to shift and move, and that as a government, we're just looking to make sure we're being responsive to that. So it's actually in great deference to the last bill that we're proposing this one, because we think that our ability to get this done and to be as responsive as we're going to be is actually because of the good work that was done in the past.
Delegate Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Delegate Howard indicated, this was before the legislature a few years back. My question is a little different. During the floor debate, I clearly recall the majority party saying that they were willing to consider variations in the minimum wage rate based on geographic location. And the reason I ask that is, as you full well know, the price and the cost of living in, say, Hagerstown or Cumberland is much different from that of living in, say, a Rockville. And our housing prices are a lot less in Western Maryland and parts of the Eastern Shore than what they are in Central Maryland. So I know that prevailing wage is set by jurisdiction. I was wondering if you all had considered or will consider setting minimum wage based on geographic location, or are you set on one rate statewide? Madam Secretary, you talked about a competitive nature. Well, as you know, Maryland is only 12 miles wide, and if you're in Hagerstown, you're 6 miles north or 6 miles south. You're in Pennsylvania or West Virginia, where the rate in West Virginia is $8.75 and Pennsylvania is $7.25. So just curious if you had considered that.
Absolutely. Well, you know, there's already flexibility, and in fact, in Maryland, you know, you do have counties that have elected to step above the state minimum wage and make their own selections. So there is always that opportunity for that adjustment by region. I think we believe that having this statewide minimum wage, however, there are many costs that all people across the state are experiencing and many challenges. They're all facing similar levels of inflation, and we looked actually at the different counties across the state and found it's very similar, a lot of the experiences that workers are facing. They don't have as much variability, for example, on things like gasoline, you know, other costs, other inputs that are coming from, you know, influenced by global markets, not just by local and regional markets. So we think that it's important there be this strong statewide floor and that wages move up together slowly through indexing for inflation. But of course, there is always the ability for individual counties to move above that if they wish to.
So you did look at things like housing?
There are variations in some costs across the state, that's true, but there has been a history in Maryland of thinking about how the state moves together with a basic minimum wage, and I'd say that's, you know, that's typical in many states. Then cities or counties can take additional action if they feel it's necessary, because frankly, they may have a more expensive cost of living there, so they often have an additional living wage or higher minimum wage that applies to that area.
So in the context of prevailing wage then, could you answer that question, why we don't have one prevailing wage across the entire state?
There are prevailing wages, but there's also those prevailing wages interact with the minimum wage floor. They have to be above that minimum wage floor. There's no option to go below it.
All right, thank you.
Delegate, thank you very much for your good questions. I believe we have Delegate Arentz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for the Secretary. Madam Secretary, you mentioned that the increase in minimum wage will bring people back to work. Can you elaborate on that?
So there have been many studies that show, for example, you know, we have a lot of history across the country of how increased minimum wages work, and we note that they don't have a negative impact on employment. Sometimes that's a concern that people raise, saying if wages are higher, maybe employers won't hire as many people. We just haven't seen that historically. I think our chief economist said we have 138 studies that show that just hasn't been the impact. In terms of bringing individuals back to work, we know that higher wages attract workers and also can help businesses understand they're investing in those workers. Something we've seen sort of anecdotally through our support through the workforce system is when we're working with employers who are struggling the most to bring workers back post-pandemic and to find the talent they need to run their business, it's often at that margin where the wages just aren't high enough and an employer who's paying slightly more is doing better. So we believe that slightly higher wages so people can meet the costs of living are important to bringing workers back.
I guess my question goes back to, what are they doing now? How are they surviving now if we have to bring them back to work? are you speaking of people that just retired and maybe would come back into the workforce in general? Or is this bill seriously going to help people who are poor? What are they, how are they living now, is what I'm asking.
So obviously, I can't speak to every case, but for example, there are a lot of costs associated with going to work. You may need to pay for your gasoline to get to work or public transportation. You'll need to find someone to help you with childcare. And so people have to make those trade-offs because right now they can manage those costs themselves. If the wage isn't high enough to help them cover those costs of going to work, they make the decision, well, for now, I'll have to stay home and I can't participate. But we know Maryland businesses are desperate for those workers and they can't grow more without them. So that's helping to change that equilibrium.
So they're living off the state now, or what are they living off currently?
So it depends on the individual circumstance. They may be living with relatives. They may be a second earner in their family. They may be only doing 2 jobs or working part-time when actually they'd like to be more full-time. There are many reasons. And also, inevitably, increased wages can help move people off of poverty and help move them off public benefits to the extent they're depending on them.
Thank you. One more, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay. Governor, it's good
You're
to
on a
see you.
roll.
He does this to me all the time. It really hurts. Can you help me out? My question, I guess, would be that we've been experiencing huge inflation right now. I mean, it's been crazy the last several months. And I believe that we can lay it on the pandemic if we want, but I do believe that because I don't know anybody right now in my world on the Eastern Shore that's making less than minimum wage. McDonald's in my district is paying higher. I'm wondering, is this thing going to attribute to the continuance of the inflation? Is it something that we should slow down a little bit and let the bill stay to where it's at? Because we did plan for this, as a delegate said. And like the other delegate mentioned down here, I live on the Eastern Shore. We don't have the benefits of business like we do over this side. It's very, very difficult for us because we have a different subset of living. Our homes are cheaper. Our cost of living, for the most part, is cheaper. So I just want to get an opinion on that, sir.
No, thank you. And when we think about the ability to increase wages for our workers, the thing that we know is, the inflationary pressure that people are seeing and workers are feeling, it is real. Our ability to provide a greater level of resources and support, and being able to pay a better wage for the people who are entering back into the workforce, that is not increasing the inflationary pressure. But what it is doing is helping the families to deal with it. Because the thing that we know is that the rate increases are not going to have a determination, or how the Fed looks to move is not going to have a determination on how Maryland looks at its wage, how Maryland looks at its wage increases. And the thing that we do know is while we have seen a relative breaking of the inflationary rise that we had seen over the past, call it 4 months, we also do have levers inside of this bill to, if that ends up becoming the trend again, and we start watching a measure of inflationary, of runaway inflation that starts taking place, that the Board of Public Works will have the authority to be able to pull back on the wage increases if we watch how inflation continues to, put a measure of a measure of pressure on Maryland families. And so we do have that type of mechanism in place to be able to support against it. But really what the wage increase is actually dealing with the inflationary pressure, not causing the inflationary pressure. I will say one thing also when we're talking about the families that are heading back in, because it is true, there's a multitude of reasons why and what families are doing right now, and it's staying with relatives, it's cutting back, it's dipping into savings. So there's a whole collection of things that families are doing right now. But part of the challenge that we do continue to see, and this is both quantitative and qualitative, is we don't want to disincentivize work. And that is also part of the conversation, part of the challenge that we have when you're having places and spaces that are not paying at a wage that can actually encourage people to come back into a workforce. We actually believe that this bill is a way of dealing with that exact issue and helping to address the fact that Maryland right now is 35th in unemployment, which is absurd when you think about Maryland's economy. We're 35th in unemployment. This is actually a way and a mechanism that can help us to do better, because even if you look at other states that have already moved towards a $15 minimum wage and indexing, even some of our neighboring states, they're actually doing better than the state of Maryland when it comes to unemployment rates.
Are you good, Steve?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Delegate Fennell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say thank you to the governor for bringing this fair wage bill. to help our families in Maryland. Thank you so much. That's all I have to say.
Bless you, Delegate. Thank you.
Delegate Harrison with a question.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Governor, thank you so much, and we do appreciate you bringing the bill. When I was chair of the Prince George's County Council, I sponsored and we pushed to raise the minimum wage in Prince George's County years ago. Actually, before that, I think the state took action. But one of the things that was not brought to our attention at the time was the reimbursement rate for the developmental disability providers. And we didn't learn about that really until it was implementation time. And so I wanted to bring that to your attention before we get to implementation time to ensure that they are not forgotten in this, because I think that their rate has not changed since we enacted the minimum wage legislation in Prince George's County and actually Montgomery County at the same time. And I think their reimbursement rate is at 4%. And so as wages go up, their salaries are really not going up, and it's very hard work, very difficult to keep those workers as well for that very needed community when they have to compete at the same rates as, you know, a fast food restaurant or something like that. So I'm hoping that that is a part of your conversation and that is included in this. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. It is, and it will be, and I'll turn it up to the Secretary to go, but that's actually a population where already there's significant levels of vacancies and significant level of openings because it is hard work. It's really challenging, and even at the $50 minimum wage, it's really challenging. So thank you for flagging that, and there actually is a component in our bill that talks about that.
Right, exactly, and I think that's reflected in the responses of the state is thinking about the expenditure requirements for some of these service providers and care providers. Absolutely, it is important work, and those workers are facing the same costs, and frankly, families that need services are facing the same shortage of workers.
Thank you very much. My agent of chaos, Delegate Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my question is for Secretary Wu, although I do want to give the governor a compliment on broadband. I think that's super important, especially in places like Southern Maryland, Western Maryland, Eastern Shore. It's the fact that that can allow you to work from home is just a huge thing, and to the extent that you have it, it makes all the difference in the world. Secretary Wu, my question concerns what I'm hearing from Calvert County, where I represent, from the business community, and they're saying their big concern is with the auto increase is tied to CPI, is that each year when they give their employees a review, which they do typically once a year in the private sector, their concern is government is deciding what the wage increase is. They're concerned about that because to the extent that you might have someone that you want to review and provide kind of a performance, like KPIs, for example, key performance indicators, they're not hitting them, and you want to work with them to become a better employee, but you want to delay the increase. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Well, employers have many tools at their disposal to help manage employees, and we all know that sometimes when we have someone we're helping to try to improve, it's not just about the money, right? It's about a lot of other incentives and dynamics in the workforce. I would say, increasing at the rate of inflation is relatively modest when we look back at the history of the increases. So I think employers will still absolutely have the ability to use additional tools and incentives at their disposal. It's just keeping up with the basic increasing in costs. So many of our other benefits and indicators already do that. I think that employers can still continue to use their other tools to incentivize.
And their other question is about wage compression. They don't just have minimum wage employees. They also have employees that are paid more than minimum wage, who then see wage compression caused by this bill, and the fear that that would also cause more inflated wages potentially in their particular industry, and they're concerned about that.
I would note, while we believe these wage increases from raising the minimum wage are incredibly important, it's still at a relatively small band of workers. And so even though, and it's true, raising the minimum wage does usually have knock-on effects of slightly increasing the wages of people making close to minimum wage. But we think that's all to the benefit. I don't know that we see it creating, as the governor noted, some sort of giant additional engine of inflation or price inflation. Most people who are making minimum wage are, immediately going to use that money to pay for very basic costs. It's not creating a giant inflationary spiral.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Governor, good to see you.
Great to see you, too.
Madam
Thank you.
Secretary as well. When we passed the original bill, the one we talked about earlier, this was Delegate Fennell's bill, and Delegate Fennell and I debated on this bill at State Circle over in the House chamber, and I remember with some specificity the things that we were talking about, the importance of helping people, and I'm an employer, 32 employees, and I was worried about the ladder to success. So in my business, I don't mind saying that I've got people making $30, $40, $50 an hour or more. But before they get to that skilled trade, they need to be that unskilled laborer that got their first step on the ladder to success. Nobody gets to the $30, $40, $50 an hour before they show and demonstrate to an employer the ability to show up to work on time, the ability to put in a full day's work for those wages. And I remember Delegate Fennell and I having that back and forth on the bill. And so my question is, when we pass bills that artificially put the government in place of the free market, when we're taking the dynamics of what it takes to take the step 1, step 2, step 10, are you worried that some people aren't going to get step 1 when we take out of the opportunity people to get that first job, that entry-level job? Those are the people I worry about, and those are the people that I've seen in my business who have been there for 20, 30 years, making the $30, $40, $50 an hour. I'm worried about that. I was worried about it then. I remain worried now. Thoughts on my concern?
Yeah, thank you. I can go first. So we are as well, and that's actually why we think the bill is so important. We actually think that this bill is something that's going to incentivize people to take that first step on the rung. That this is something that's going to incentivize people to return to a workforce. That's going to incentivize people to be able to turn something from a job into a career. That this actually provides a platform for them to be able to enter back into a workforce and then be able to get back on that processes of being able to learn and grow and build for not just their family in the short term, but also their family inside of the long term. What this in effect is doing is both in the acceleration of minimum wage, but also on the indexing, is adding a measure of predictability both for the worker and also for the employer. And so that's why we believe in combination that these things are actually providing the exact kind of opportunities that you're mentioning, because we want to get people back to work. As there is a reopening of an economy, we want to make sure that's a more inclusive reopening of an economy. And Maryland is falling behind. And we think that this allows us to be competitive, not just with other neighboring states, in terms of making sure that we have competitive markets and predictability for our businesses, but also with other states that are within the country as well.
Thank you, Governor. I agree, and as I mentioned earlier, we have vast amounts of history of the impacts of minimum wage, and it just doesn't show that there are those impacts of negative effects on employment. There will still be opportunities, and especially in this strong labor market, this is actually a great time to do this, and as the governor said, to reward work. It's really important to provide those incentives, and we see, especially with younger people, getting that good first job and getting on that path does enable them to move on to a career of more engagement with the labor force. We want to make sure that engagement is worth it and brings them into the labor market and provides opportunities and stability so they can keep going and keep progressing.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, one follow-up, if you don't mind. So, and I appreciate the answer to that. I think you'll have some debate during the hearing today to the point. But the second question that I have relates to the first one, which is that inflation is real. It's not just the people buying the groceries and buying the gas that are experiencing this. These are the employers that are seeing their bill of goods go up extravagantly in ways that don't match market principles. I believe that much of what's happening now is due to a rubber band effect where the COVID crisis created inequities in the marketplace, our international trade, how the state of Maryland and our different states throughout the country are trying to resolve supply chain issues, and we are just maybe now starting to get some balance in the marketplace. But the way we're getting balance is because we're raising the prices to match the demand, and the supply-demand curve right now is off. It feels like a rubber band effect. It feels like that the things that are happening haven't hit the consumer just yet, but it's like that close. That's my feeling on it as an employer. And I worry that when we pass bills like this, we are putting in the rearview mirror the world of COVID, what happened just a few years ago, and that these are going to have long-term ripple effects through the economy. And these types of legislation where we close the door not only this year if we pass the bill, but for every year forward because of the CPI indexing, that you might have, and I believe it's quite possible, a recession of some magnitude at the same time that we're driving wage increases that employers just simply can't afford. And I would appreciate your thoughts on that position, because it's meaningful to me as an employer who have these concerns. It's what keeps me up at night.
Yeah, no, and thank you, because these are things that keep me up at night as well.
Thank you.
You know, and if you think about, and if you look at how we laid things out and everything from our state of the state to our proposed budget, it is very clear that potential economic downturn, and we are hedging against that. If you look at the fact that we, are both saying that we believe in being able to, be bold and ambitious and believe in things like the Fair Wage Act, and at the same time, we also believe in keeping, a 10% funding in the rainy day fund, and also be smart about what can potentially happen. It shows that this administration is bringing a measure of balance into this conversation. We also though know that as we think about the macroeconomic pressures that are taking place, and you're right, there are many factors that are playing into inflationary. Whether we're talking about item shortages or gas prices and other commodity prices, or the impact of the war in Ukraine, right? These are all things that are having significant impacts on pricing and inflation that are outside of a sphere of what Maryland alone can help to do with. What we're doing with this piece of legislation, and hopefully doing a partnership with this piece of legislation, is just making sure that regardless of the larger macroeconomic trends that we might be able to see, that this is a way to ensure that Maryland can stay focused on supporting our workers, making sure that we're incentivizing work, and at the same time providing that level of predictability for the businesses. Because you're right, as business owners, small business owners, the thing that many business owners fear most is, well, what is this going to look like in 3 years from now? What is this going to look like in 6 years from now? What we're saying with this piece of legislation is not only do we have the 5% cap, which adds a measure of stability to the businesses and predictability for the businesses, it is also saying that if you do have larger macroeconomic trends that start to veer towards a measure of inflation or stagflation, whatever it is that the state of Maryland might potentially see, that we should have the economic levers at PPW and otherwise to be able to be adaptive and responsive. And it's the same thing when we talk about adaptability and responsibility, where we say, looking at the piece of legislation that was passed a few years ago, we feel that this legislation is a way of being adaptive and responsive. We have tools inside of this piece of legislation that helps our employers to understand that we are going to keep our hands on the wheel as we're continuing to move forward and make sure that we're supporting both workers and businesses in the process.
Thank you, Chair.
And before we go to our last Republican, the last question, our county exec, we don't normally allow politicians to wax poetically, but it looks like you've had something you wanted to say, so I'd love to hear
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to put and Delegate, thank you for the opportunities you provide to our Marylanders. Good opportunities, but just to put a finer point to the governor's and the secretary's point about grabbing that first rung, we have a nursing partnership that we just launched in Baltimore County with our community college and University of Maryland St. Joseph. We are taking some of the most socially vulnerable residents in Baltimore County and taking them from potentially even on social services to getting an LPN and then becoming sort of more towards a fully registered nurse within 2 years. What we have found in that program is that without guaranteeing a wage and actually going even further, without providing wraparound services for childcare, transportation, housing, we've heard from countless residents, and it's not even launched yet. We are well oversubscribed, but they have said without those supports, we wouldn't be able to make that journey. And so just wanted to reinforce in a very real way that making sure that people can actually grab that first rung, because we very much agree on those ladders to opportunity. Yeah, thank you.
And our last Republican, Delegate Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Governor, I appreciate you coming in person. I may get in trouble for saying this, but I don't remember another governor coming in to a committee. So I respect you for that.
Thank you.
So this question is for Secretary. And one of the things you had mentioned in your previous testimony was that high price of gasoline in some cases changed the behavior of a maybe would-be employee. And what we saw this summer with gasoline prices that, as you know, were tied to inflation, the tax-related. But gasoline prices kind of went through the roof. And I would imagine that probably did have an impact on whether somebody chose to commute to work or seek a job maybe further away. And so the question I have is kind of in reverse, because looking at the minimum wage, should this pass, it would go to 15, and then assuming that the Board of Public Works does not veto the increase of 5%, within 3 years we'd be at $17.25, which would be the highest minimum wage of Pennsylvania, Delaware, West Virginia, Virginia, so we'd be the highest in the region. So would it be fair to say that an employer may change their behavior if they are now having to pay a much larger expense, which is employee wages? Is it fair to say that that could change their behavior? And the reason I say that is I feel like the premise of this bill is to create opportunities, and I think an employer or prospective employers coming to our state are going to have to look at this and say, is this a place where we want to open up shop? Or do we really have the funds to create a new position to hire somebody? I think we have the same goals, but I'm concerned, I think with some of my colleagues here, is that the indexing of the minimum wage could make it less attractive for an employer to want to be here, to want to do business here. And I'm hoping I can just get your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Well, first I'll note, because the indexing is tied to inflation, those kinds of, significant increases, and again, as the governor noted, there is a cap here. There are also some other safety valves in the legislation, but that assumes a situation where there could be, there's already a very strong, much higher than historical average level of inflation. Like when we went and looked back, it's really hovering around 2.2, 2.4% historically. So we have history to draw on that. Typically, the wages are, the wage would be pegged to increases that are fairly modest over a long period of time. If you suddenly have a situation where there is, aggressive inflation year over year, I think businesses will have a lot of dynamics they need to take into account. And certainly, as I noted, employment is one of them, how many people they employ, but that's going to be a dynamic we'll be seeing all around the region. As I said, you already have major states in the Mid-Atlantic region where all the businesses and the workers are already covered under an indexing regime, very similar to the one proposed in this bill. And that means that Maryland would simply be joining those ranks. If we did pass this legislation, we're talking about 2/3 of the businesses and the workforce in this region being covered under a similar provision. So I do think that you're right. Economies change, and that can impact business behavior. But at the same time, we've seen that these types of frameworks are very livable for business. It provides predictability and certainty. And frankly, in those climates, businesses are already making a lot of changes to deal with increased costs. And we see right now, the vast majority of businesses are already taking these steps in a tight labor market. They need to increase the wages. They've gone above and beyond to their credit, and they want to support their workers. So we do see that businesses are already heading down this path.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
And thank you to my last and my other agent of chaos, Delegate Charcuti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Governor, for your leadership on this. It's so important as a piece of all of the things that we're doing to create economic security for the most vulnerable people in the state. And I do appreciate the indexing. It's something that we talked a lot about, and I really thought was important 4 years ago, and it didn't kind of make it into the mix, but I'm really glad that it's back because I think the indexing is crucial, that as we have inflationary changes, we need to make sure that all of our various wages and safety net services keep up. And I actually want to touch base about safety net services because I wanted to ask any of you to speak to the fact that when our wages don't keep up, we have to subsidize making sure people can survive with our other safety net services, and that's got to come from taxes and from the rest of the state budget. And so if you could just speak to folks who are earning these wages and other safety net services that they depend on, and how when we keep wages higher in the state, we actually are able to, not have to subsidize those wages with state budgets from other sources, whether that be SNAP or any of the other safety net services that help people survive. Thank you.
Thank you. And as we know, thank you for the question. Of course, there are many supports that individuals do rely on. And I think that's one of the best things about increasing the minimum wage is people want to be self-sufficient, right? They want to be in control of their own destiny. They don't want to have to rely on multiple programs. And frankly, when people have to spend a lot of time applying for different benefit programs, figuring out what they are eligible for here or there, piecing together parts of their family budget, right? That's incredibly stressful. And it also means people are in a survival mode every single day. That doesn't give them the stability and the ability to think, okay, I'm doing all right today. I've got these basic things covered. How can I think now about the future for myself, my family? How can I enroll in that nursing program or think about how my kids can get into a better school? So I think it has, the direct effects, of course, of reducing reliance on government benefits, which we all want to see happen, and encouraging work, but also it has the long-term investment and stability effects that the governor referred to before.
Very briefly, that's exactly right. And the data is also very, very clear on this. Also what it can do, where if we could be able to decrease the level of unemployment that we continue to see in the state of Maryland, then continue to also give people more dispensable capital that we know that they are going to spend out in an economy to help to give economic churn as well. And then you think about it from the final perspective, it is this psychological impact that it does have on individuals, that it does have on families. And so so you're absolutely right. I mean, this is something we think that is not only going to create a measurement of economic vitalization for the family, it's a measure of economic vitalization for the state. And also when you think about so many services to include things like unemployment insurance, it doesn't factor in, or it gets factored in, as we're also talking about putting more people on a path to economic sustainability.
Seeing no more questions for this panel, Governor, thank you for surviving the brutal crucible that is ECM.
We smiled
You guys
through
did a
it.
great job. We'll now be calling our next panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you both.
Miles Hicks.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Ellie Gould, Elisa Barron-Menza, and Michael Astoria. Are any of these individuals here? Please come on up, have a seat, and when seated, introduce yourselves for the record.
I'm just here for questions.
Good.
Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to speak today in support of the Fair Wage Act of 2023. My name is Elise Gould, and I'm a senior economist with the Economic Policy Institute, a nonpartisan, nonprofit research organization in Washington, D.C. In my testimony, I'll demonstrate that legislating a $15 minimum wage in 2023 simply updates the minimum wage law passed by Maryland legislators, many of you in this room, in 2019, before the pandemic and the unexpected increase in inflation. I will also provide evidence that raising the minimum wage to $15 in 2023 advances gender and racial justice and will improve Maryland workers' chances of obtaining a decent standard of living for themselves and their families. When Maryland legislators set the new minimum wage back in 2019 to reach $15 in 2025, they did not expect the pandemic recession, nor did they anticipate the sustained period of higher inflation. We used price expectations from back in 2019. An equivalent wage of $15 in 2025 would actually be $15.56 today. This is because prices increased between 2019 and 2025 even faster than prices were expected to increase between 2019 and 2025. Raising the Maryland minimum wage to $15 now is an important step toward reaching the goal legislators set 4 years ago. Legislating a higher minimum wage can lock in the wage gains that some low-wage workers were able to secure in the current economy and keep workers from falling behind if the labor market weakens. Indexing the minimum wage in the future will keep the most vulnerable workers losing ground as prices rise. Without indexing, the inflation-adjusted minimum wage will lose value year after year, lowering the ability for workers and their families to make ends meet. An increase to the Maryland minimum wage to $15 in 2025 will significantly raise the pay of historically marginalized workers. Black and Hispanic workers are almost twice as likely as white workers to experience gains, and women are about 40% more likely than men to benefit, and it will narrow gender and racial pay gaps. Even at $15 an hour, it is hard for Maryland workers to support themselves, let alone a family. According to EPI's Family Budget Calculator, there is no county in Maryland, including lower-cost Allegheny or Washington counties, where $15 per hour is enough for a full-time worker to afford a modest yet adequate standard of living, even as a single adult with no children. It takes far more to support a family. You have the opportunity to help Maryland's low-wage workers keep up with the higher prices, to advance gender and racial justice, and to enable workers and their families to make ends meet.
Wrap up.
I respectfully urge you to seize this opportunity and pass this legislation.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Crosby, Committee, my name is Alyssa Barron-Menza. I'm Vice President of Business for a Fair Minimum Wage, a network of owners, executives, and business groups that supports HB 549. I'm a resident of District 20. You'll hear from a range of our members today in support. We supported passage of the $15 minimum wage, but we hope for a faster pace than the enacted compromise, and we supported indexing, which was not included. The Fair Wage Act is timely given increases in cost of living since 15 was passed. It makes good business sense to speed up implementation of 15 to restore the lost buying power of the minimum wage and then adjust it annually so that the minimum wage does not lose purchasing power. Raising the minimum wage puts money in the pockets of people who most need to spend it. It boosts consumer buying power and our economy. Fair pay is also good business. Low pay typically means high employee turnover. Raising the minimum wage saves businesses money in lower turnover, reduced hiring and training costs, lower error and accident rates, and better productivity, product quality, and customer service. Keeping the minimum wage low does not help small businesses. Low-wage businesses have more trouble hiring and retaining workers. Raising the wage floor under all businesses will boost consumer spending and encourage the better business practices that help small businesses survive and compete. Many businesses already pay a $15 minimum wage or higher now. Costco pays $17. Target, Amazon, and Best Buy, for example, already pay at least $15. Many small businesses pay $15 or higher now because they know it helps them hire and retain workers and makes them more competitive. For small businesses to succeed in competition with big chains and online companies with fast delivery, you need to give customers a reason to choose your business. That comes back to customer service and employees who can afford to stay with you and help you keep up with what customers want. Extensive research shows raising the minimum wage does not cause job loss or business closures. With our written testimony, we submitted a summary of research on minimum wage and employment, productivity, employee turnover, customer service, spending, profits, health, safety, and more. We respectfully urge a favorable report. Thank you very much for your time.
Resisting the urge to mic check this thing. Pretty excited about it. My name is Michael Astoria. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called And Pizza. We currently have about 65 locations ranging from New York, with our headquarters being in Washington, D.C., so we have a huge presence here. If you haven't been to an And Pizza, I would highly encourage you to go. If you've been, come back and visit us. That's how we make money. Very important. But I'm here because the And Pizza has always represented uniting the working class around fair wages. Growing up in and around a lot of poverty in Western New York in a town of 500 people, I wanted to make it my life's work to start a concept, one in food service. The food service industry employs 10% of America's workforce, and prove to myself and prove to the business community as part of and membership of Business for a Fair Minimum Wage that you can both pay as close to a living wage possible, and you can have incredible economics. We have the highest revenue per pizza shop in the country, the highest margins. We're paying on average now $19 an hour across multiple markets, and we've opened 20 locations since the start of the pandemic, which, as you know, has been brutal and tough for all small business owners. And I'm here to testify by someone who's in the trenches. I was on my phone because, again, everything that goes wrong in restaurants happens on a Friday, but also a Monday, and know that it's a grind. It is a grind, but it's one that we're super passionate about, and one that I can bring testimony to help understand and help educate what life is like making $15 an hour, what life is making $16 an hour up to $19, $20, and working shoulder to shoulder every single day with the workforce in America. And I can tell you firsthand how far or not $15 really stretches. It's not a lot of money. We're talking about an average of an additional $1,000 a year per employee. It's not a lot. We've got 1,200, and quite frankly, I wish they were all here to testify on behalf of And Pizza, on behalf of the businesses, because I think you would learn more from them than you can from me about what life is really like and how far a dollar stretches. So thank you for having me. Again, a huge proponent of this. I think indexing is far less emotional. It's the right thing to do. It makes decisions and predictability in our business far easier. And that's the name of the game. We need predictable scheduling. We need predictable wages. And we need predictable revenue, ultimately profitability continue to grow. We've had a great success over the last decade. And looking forward to just educating, sharing my point of view as someone who's doing it every single day.
I'm just going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Done.
All right, my man. Thank you so much. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. The next group we'll call Willie Flowers, Aaron Sahadian, Gina Schaefer, Marceline White, and Kristen Nateson. And you can start when ready.
Ladies first.
Okay. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Marceline White. I'm the Executive Director of Economic Action Maryland, formerly the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition. Economic Action Maryland advances economic rights and equity, as well as housing justice through research, education, direct service, and policy advocacy. We're here in strong support of House Bill 549, and I want to thank the governor for introducing the bill. As I mentioned, part of our work is around direct services. So in the past year, in 2022, we worked with almost 1,400 tenants who were having issues and provided almost $500,000 back to older adults through our direct service work. I can tell you that we saw a number of calls coming in on both of our hotlines because of inflation. Members have talked about it already, but we know that food prices, utilities, gas, and auto insurance, as well as rent, have soared over the past 12 months. We know that this is not something people can budget their way out of or use financial literacy, even though those are both important programs. The money simply doesn't stretch. There's not enough day-to-day to help people live paycheck to paycheck, and people are falling behind. So we are here in strong support of the legislation. I'm also here in strong support of the indexing. And in part, what that simply says is the $15 you are paid today will allow you to buy the same basket of goods in 5 years. So just make sure that people are not falling behind. And it has some reasonable caps on it to do so. So I believe that it's particularly important to make sure that people aren't falling behind when we see these kinds of inflationary aspects. And for those reasons, because I think it provides important supports today and allows us to make sure that people don't fall behind in future, I'm in strong support and ask for a favorable report. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Willie Flowers. I'm with the NAACP. This bill is significant. It's particularly significant, as mentioned earlier, about the challenges that have happened in the last, since the original bill was written and passed. And I was concerned about the delay then, and I'm even more concerned about the delay now. And quite frankly, $15 time was, 3 years ago when the bill was written, and it's certainly overloaded now because of the significant rise in everything from eggs to gas, just about everything. But the unique thing about the timing is that while those challenges have happened, we have had the conversations about supply chain and all those details. The reality is that some communities are still the same, and marginalized communities are still the same because, you know, the private sector has always manipulated workers, and this is consistent with the history of slavery, and we know that story. But the significance here is that while that is still the case, and I do want to say for the record that marginalized communities stay marginalized because of things like the very low minimum wage. And I will add here that we have a unique opportunity at this time in history with the advancement in technology. Every frontline worker has a challenge with automation, and automation has been triggered by the fact that technology has advanced in such a way that businesses can actually choose other ways of paying people. And with the devices that we know, if you've been to the self-checked at Giant or anywhere, those are advancements that give an opportunity for businesses to raise the minimum wage. And it's overlooked in this conversation,
But I think that that is a more dynamic reality about what we can do going from here. And every business should adjust to the times, and indexing is the way to go. So I want to thank you, and I urge the approval of this bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thanks to the committee for having me. My name is Aaron Siedion. I'm the owner of Well Paid Maids. We're a living wage home cleaning company in Montgomery and Prince George's counties. I'm also a member of Business for a Fair Minimum Wage. I strongly support House Bill 549. All my employees make at least $22 an hour and receive a full benefits package, including health insurance and paid time off. In our experience, offering good wages and benefits leads to a happier, healthier, and more productive workforce. And having doubled in size in the last year, I can tell you it leads to more customers as consumers search for the quality and reliability that comes from fairly compensated workers. In a sector known for low pay, cleaning, our success is proof that fair wages are not only good for business, but that they are compatible with every industry. Despite all the data showing that a higher minimum wage is good for the economy, some will say that right now is not the right time. Well, we raised our own wage floor by $3 in the spring of 2021. Following the most acute phase of the pandemic and after 7 months of being closed, and the benefits of that pay increase surprised even me. This $3 an hour bump massively boosted the number of applicants applying for open positions, and it improved our retention, cutting turnover by 30%. Due to the increase in our wage floor, we had no trouble finding qualified applicants to fill our open positions. The labor shortage was something I just read about. Increasing our minimum wage saved us time and money. It costs us $6,000 in hiring and training every time an employee leaves, and higher wages reduce turnover and save money for other investments, keeping our employees productive and efficient and keeping morale high, which helps retain and grow our customer base. In 6 years, we've grown to over 30 employees and are continuing to hire to meet demand. I also operate in DC, which has been indexing its minimum wage for several years. These annual adjustments have not been huge jumps, but rather incremental changes. It's time for Maryland to accelerate its path to $15 an hour, which, and gets lost in the wage discussion, that's $31K a year if you work full-time, convert it into a salary. Not an eye-watering number. And add indexing to ensure purchasing power of our minimum wage remains strong. This will improve productivity, ease hiring, reduce turnover, and delight customers, all while putting more dollars in the pockets of hardworking Marylanders. I urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, thank you. My name is Gina Schaefer, and I'm the founder and CEO of A Few Cool Hardware Stores. We opened 20 years ago, and since then have grown to 12 hardware stores in Maryland, DC, and Virginia, including in Baltimore City, Canton, Federal Hill, and Waverly, and in Montgomery County, Old Tacoma Ace, and Silver Spring Ace Hardware. We're members of a Business for a Fair Minimum Wage. I have 275 to 300 teammates, and across our 3 jurisdictions, we've always paid whatever the highest prevailing starting wage is. We support House Bill 549 and speed up the implementation to 15 with the annual cost of living adjustments. We couldn't have grown to the 12 hardware stores without our dedicated teammates and the customers they serve every day. Fair wages have helped us attract and retain good employees, increase our sales, expand our business into new locations, and hire more people. I also like to think of making retail jobs as careers, and I think higher wages help that become a reality. Our employee retention rates are higher than the industry average. In fact, we have about a 50% higher less of a turnover rate than the industry average. We save time and money in our hiring and our training and our onboarding due to needless turnover rather than creating an intentional workforce. Paying better wages and benefits was key to our ability to retain and hire staff throughout the pandemic. When many other retailers had difficulty, we did not. When employees earn a decent wage, they can concentrate on their jobs and our customers without continual stress over how to afford the basics. More money in their pockets puts more money on our main streets. They can focus on delivering great customer service, which is vital for local businesses like ours. Minimum wage increases don't just go into workers' pockets and disappear. The money recirculates as spending at local businesses, smaller businesses like ours and others around us. Whole communities are then strengthened. Annual cost of living adjustments are also vital for workers and businesses. With minimum wage falling behind when it falls behind the cost of living, people have less money to spend. In DC, annual adjustments have been manageable and help businesses like ours plan for all of the costs and increases. I did say that we paid the highest across all jurisdictions, which, as you know, is the District of Columbia, and we've managed to still stay in business quite well in Baltimore and Montgomery County. Improving Maryland's minimum wage will help businesses hire and retain workers and will help our communities thrive, and I urge a favorable report on HB 549. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, and to the entire committee. My name is Pastor Chris Nateeson. I pastor Love AME Church in Prince George's County, found in Largo, Maryland. And I come to you because I heard somebody say to me before that you can't out-train a poor diet. You can work out all you want, but you're not going to get rid of all those calories. And I come here today to let you know you can budget all you want, but you cannot make $13.50 livable because you're not going to be able to make it on any zip code found within this state. There will be a struggle whether you're going to be able to pay the rent, whether you're going to be able to pay the utility, whether you're going to be able to put food in the refrigerator. We're talking about $60 more a week. Seems like chump change to everybody probably around this table because we'll blow $60 when we leave out of here for a nice lunch when we'll take our friend at the lobster place right around the corner. However, the reality is there is a mother wondering if they can put some food on the table. They're not wondering if they can take their kids to Disney World, but maybe on their birthday, maybe I'll be able to afford a couple movie tickets and even have some popcorn for them. We're not talking about any luxuries here. We're talking about a livable wage. And if we're quite honest, this move to $15 faster is really just a move to a more livable wage, because the reality, it's still poverty. And if we're interested in the citizens of this great state of Maryland, if the citizens matter in Maryland, if they matter, if the young boy in the furthest stretches of Maryland, to those that are in the suburbs and to the tree-hugging communities, to those that are in our inner cities of Prince George's County, if they matter, then we'll make movement so that they'll be more successful and they'll have opportunities just to have the basics. I urge a favorable report on House Bill 549. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Delegate Aarons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This will be for one of you on the group because I think everybody will have an opinion. In my district, we have many locations, jobs paying well over $15 an hour currently, and they are struggling for employees. If this were the answer, why aren't they overloaded? Just one of you. You can pick who.
Where are you from?
I live on the Eastern Shore.
Okay. What city on the Eastern Shore?
I live in Queenstown. Does it matter? I mean.
Yeah, it does matter because location. But I think that on the conversation about the minimum wage, you said $12. Is that correct?
No, I said we're paying well over $15 an hour in minimum wage. They're offering that to people when they can't get employees. If this is the answer, why aren't those places overwhelmed with employees?
Well, I think the Eastern Shore is a little different than anywhere else in the state in regard to population, so that might have something to do with it.
Did you answer my question? Or?
I did. You have a very low population on the Eastern Shore, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
You know, I visited the Eastern Shore.
Sir.
Oh, sorry.
It's for just
I thought it was still
no, you're good.
Okay.
You're good. One question, one person answers. Okay. Seeing no additional questions, that concludes this panel. Next up, we will go to Courtney Sunborn, Christiane Marguerite, Diana Forrester, Breege Dumais, and Christopher Meyer. And you can start when ready. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of speeding up the implementation of Maryland's...
Ma'am, can I just ask you to move that mic closer to you?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
My name is Courtney Sunborn, and I am the owner of Ecolistic Cleaning. We founded 20 years ago in 2003 in Annapolis. We provide residential and commercial green cleaning services in Anne Arundel County, Baltimore City, as well as Sussex County, Delaware. I strongly support raising and indexing Maryland's minimum wage. I know from experience paying livable wage is good business. This is our 20th year and we're still growing. I started the company as a cleaner myself, and I know how difficult and physically intense the work is. And so from our founding, we made a decision to pay livable wages. No employee makes less than $18 an hour, and we pay up to $24 an hour. By paying living wages, we keep our staff turnover very low. It saves us time and money to retain employees who are already trained and know our clients. Low turnover brings increased morale and productivity and happier clients. Our clients appreciate the reliability and sense of security that comes from seeing the same faces in their homes and offices week after week and year after year. It is not enough to speed up the path to $15 an hour. Without an annual cost of living adjustments, the minimum wage will begin falling behind again. Annual cost of living adjustments makes good business sense because it ensures the minimum wage retains its purchasing power over time. Raising and indexing Maryland's minimum wage will help workers, businesses, and communities succeed now and in the future. It will strengthen Maryland's economy for everyone, so I ask for a favorable report on House Bill 549. Thank you.
Do you want to? Good afternoon. I'm Deanna Forster. I'm the president of the Metro Washington Labor Council. I would like to let the chairman of the committee know that I am here in person and excited. I have the privilege of testifying in support of a governor's bill for the very first time to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. As I would say, as labor, oftentimes we're looked at fighting for collective bargaining rights, but throughout the pandemic and even with these wage and benefit legislation, we show that we don't just care about unionized workers, but all workers, because raising the minimum wage raises the floor for all workers, despite if they're a part of a union or not. I'll just take a moment of personal privilege because I know oftentimes people look at the minimum wage increase as it's something that helps teenagers buy tennis shoes. It doesn't impact people that are looking to make career jobs. As the panel said before us, I was 18 years old when I had my first daughter. I spent the first 10 years of her life having 2 minimum wage jobs, working as a hostess and as a cashier. Her father also had a job making a minimum wage. It was not enough to take care of her. So we had to work those jobs and go to college and be able to pursue our career. So this is just doing the bare minimum, and it's beyond time to do it. So excited to be here. Thank you so much.
All right, I hate to play a trick, but I am not Christian Marguerite. That's actually our communications director who registered me, but my name is Larry Stafford Jr.
Sir, I'm not trying to cut you off. If you're not signed up, I can't let you testify.
Oh,
I apologize. We can go to the next panelist.
Well, I guess I should have said I was Christian.
I'd have believed it.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Bridge Dumais. I'm the political coordinator with 1199 SEIU, United Healthcare Workers East. We are the largest healthcare workers union in the country, representing over 10,000 members in Maryland and DC alone. Our union is a co-founder of Fight for 15 Maryland, and we urge a favorable report on the Fair Wage Act of 2023 with indexing to the cost of living. Low wages are driving the short staffing crisis in our healthcare industry. During the pandemic, some healthcare workers were forced to leave the industry because they felt their wages didn't match the health risks that they were taking on every day. I spoke with a former healthcare worker who said that if she was making just $1 or $2 more an hour, she would have stayed. And the healthcare workers who did stay and continue to care for us and our loved ones every single day are still being overworked and underpaid in short-staffed facilities. Raising wages will help retain healthcare workers and benefit patients too. Due to an unsustainable patient-to-worker ratio, Maryland has the longest hospital wait times in the country. Too many patients don't seek primary health care or take their medications as prescribed simply because they cannot afford to. That means we see more and more patients' health deteriorate to the point where they end up in the emergency department. Raising wages alone won't do everything to fix this crisis. We need to expand free and affordable health care. But for now, increasing wages can help patients incur less medical debt and be a little bit more able to afford their medications, reducing the overall likelihood that they end up in the hospital. Healthcare workers and other low-wage essential workers carried us through the COVID-19 pandemic. It is immoral that many of them still earn less than $15 an hour. The best way to thank essential workers for their sacrifices, the best way to show dignity and respect is to raise their wages this year. For those reasons, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee. My name is Christopher Meyer. I'm a research analyst at the Maryland Center on Economic Policy, here in strong support of House Bill 549. I think it has become increasingly clear over the past several years that low-wage jobs are not unskilled jobs, but they're undervalued jobs. They're healthcare jobs, taking care of people who are ill or elderly or have a disability. Often they're retail and food service jobs that involve directly facing health risks or dealing with unruly customers. Ensuring a strong minimum wage that keeps up with the cost of living is the only way to make sure that our economy leaves no one behind. Today, there are about 103,000 Marylanders who are working but still have family poverty below the family income below the poverty line. House Bill 549 would bring increased income to 39% of those workers. I also want to discuss briefly how House Bill 549 would affect the economy. First of all, there's really strong empirical evidence that raising the minimum wage does not have a strong effect on the number of jobs available. So we've heard, some qualitative arguments about why it might, but the evidence is in that it does not. We've also seen that the inflation we've seen over the past few years is driven by supply chain issues, geopolitics, and wages simply haven't been a major contributor. Finally, in a recession, should we have one in the next few years, ensuring family supporting wages is important to make sure that we still have decent spending at local businesses. So I'm asking for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. We will now go to the favorable with amendments who are in person, and we will come back at the end to do all the virtual testimony. I have Lori Doyle, Laura Howe, Dana Kaufman, Marlon Tilgman, and Todd Yeary. And you can start when ready.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Lori Doyle on behalf of the Community Behavioral Health Association of Maryland, here today in support with amendments. Our organization represents 112 organizations that provide mental health and substance use disorder services in the community. We're able to support this bill because Governor Moore's budget accelerates the last 2 years of the rate increases for fiscal years 25 and 26 that were included in the minimum wage bill you all passed in 2019, and we thank the governor for doing so. The work our staff do is demanding. We have to pay above minimum wage if we're to have any hope of attracting and retaining a qualified workforce. Our rates are set by Maryland Medicaid. We cannot pass additional costs on to our clients. So while we support this bill, we are concerned that it calls for the minimum wage to be indexed to CPI or 5%, whichever is less. Our rates must keep pace with these increases, or we will fall behind as we did in the decades of flat budgets prior to passage of the mandated rate increases in the Fight for 15 legislation of 2019. We therefore ask that any indexing for minimum wage be similarly applied to our rates. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Laura Howell, Executive Director of the Maryland Association of Community Services, here on behalf of the Developmental Disabilities Coalition, here in support with amendment for House Bill 549. There are 25,000 Marylanders who rely on developmental disability services to live, work, and thrive in their communities, and community providers with direct support professionals who make that possible. The people we support have developmental disabilities such as Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, and autism, to name a few. We struggle every day to stay ahead of the minimum wage so that these critically important jobs can be filled. And in 2014 and 2019, you passed legislation that addressed the need for rate increases tied to an increase in the state minimum wage, and we are grateful for that. We're here asking you to remain consistent with that policy decision and to adopt an amendment included in our testimony to include a rate increase whenever the CPI indexing drives an increase in the minimum wage. Without this amendment, agencies for people with developmental disabilities would lose their capacity to provide services, and that is a risk that we cannot face. And therefore, without our amendment, we would oppose the part of the bill that includes indexing, but we don't want to do that. We just want to see this amendment adopted. This committee adopted sound policy for the last 10 years, balancing the needs of Marylanders with developmental disabilities with the needs to address equality income. So on behalf of Marylanders with developmental disabilities and community providers, we strongly recommend adoption of our amendments as part of the Fair Wage Act. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Dana Kaufman. I'm here on behalf of several healthcare organizations. My testimony is very similar to what you have just heard, but it's on behalf of the Medicaid providers. These are those providers who take care of individuals in medical adult day settings, in home care, in nursing homes. They rely on the Medicaid budget and sometimes actually the Medicare budget, meaning that they do not have the ability to cost shift when there are additional expenses. If you're going to increase one side of the equation and increase expenses, you also have to do it on the second side of the equation and increase the reimbursement levels. As you just heard, you did that when you initially passed this bill, and we would ask that if indexing is kept in, that you also continue that trend and make sure that those same groups are protected from indexing and that the Medicaid budget compensates for these added expenses and wages. And with that, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Todd Yeary. I'm the senior pastor of Douglas Memorial Community Church, former CEO and chief of global policy of the Rainbow Push Coalition, now senior advisor to Reverend Jesse Jackson, who is the founder and president. I'm here to put in context something that I think is unintentionally overlooked in the language in the bill, and that is what happens if we have sustained inflation over a number of years that exceeds 5%, and there is no remediation to close that gap once we see the CPI return to normal range. Since 1913, there have been 12 years where the CPI was less than 0, 25 years when it was more than 5, and most of the time in those 25 years, those years persisted more than 3. If we're going to cap the CPI and the increase of the minimum wage to 5%, which I think is responsible, we also have to make sure that we do not do a disservice to the cumulative harm that happens when the economy turns down significantly. I would use just as one example for you, the practicality of diapers. Yes, diapers. Diapers are not covered by SNAP. You cannot purchase diapers to take care of your children using federal benefits. You have to pay out of pocket. If workers are going to find child care and have to provide diapers for their children in an inflationary context, it means then that they're going to have to do some decision making. They're going to have to make some choices about where they cut to be able to make sure they can get their kids taken care of. It is in the practical reality of situations like that that warrants that not only should we pass HB 549, but we should also make sure that if we must cap for a number of years, that in the succeeding years where there has been a 5% cap, there is some additional enhancement to the years below 5% so that we do not recreate the economic harm that vulnerable Marylanders are facing. With that, I would urge a favorable report with amendments.
Thank you. Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Dana, I remember, because I was in subcommittee, and Delegate Howard mentioned this as well, and one of the more interesting parts of that resolution was you coming forward with your industry saying that this bill needs to match the funding that we're going to need to pay. And I just remember the spreadsheets. I remember the detail. I also remember the amounts of money that the state had to put forward to make this happen. And I might be editorializing a little bit, but I'll just ask the question, and I might be completely wrong. So if I'm wrong, just tell me I'm wrong. That the reason why we stepped minimum wage over a period of time was as much about a budget exercise for the state of Maryland on issues like this or other issues where the state of Maryland has to pay these wages going forward. And that as we're talking about CPI and how we're trying to target things now and into the future without any debate in the legislature, that we're sort of ignoring one of the policy conversations that resulted in the sort of stepped incremental basis that we didn't just slam and go right to $15 an hour. Am I right on that, or do you think I need a refresher in my memory on that?
Well,
I hope I'm asking that question correctly, because I think I believe that's what happened in subcommittee.
I'm not sure what happened exactly in subcommittee, but I will tell you that the ability for the phase-in and to match it with our rates was very necessary, as opposed to going, I think, straight, because we can already see now that just combining 2 years does have a fiscal impact. Our bigger concern is that the rates have always been below the cost of providing care, and there have been studies on that. So to, again, just to reemphasize, if you increase one side of the equation, you have to increase the other. So with the indexing, if we don't have the other side of the equation increasing our reimbursement rates, then we are going to even fall further behind and have an additional hardship in trying to continue to provide quality of care.
My follow-up to that is, if we do pass the bill with the CPI, and even if we put your industry in and we pay you the same rate as we're going forward, are you worried that the state gets into a very difficult budget situation where they have to start making cuts or raising taxes, which I don't think we would want to do as a state of Maryland? Are you worried that they might come back later and say, well, look, we just can't afford to do this the way that we originally planned back in 2024? In other words, your numbers were big numbers. I mean, these were big budget impacts that weren't easy to reconcile. And would you be worried that if we get the agreement today, that it might not always be that way, especially if the economy does what I think some are concerned will actually happen, which is go into a fairly deep recession?
I have been down here for 25 years, sad to say. And I will say that that is always, regardless of this bill, but is always a concern that when the economy or revenues decrease, one of the first steps that the state often has taken is to reduce provider rates. And when you do increase wages, the problem is you can't decrease wages. So it does put the providers into a bind moving forward. We always have to make sure that whatever we do in year 1 is sustainable in year 4 and is taken into account in those outlier budget years.
Thank you for your testimony.
Delegate Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. You're absolutely right, and we should look at that at a more local level too. But anyway, because that's where there's going to be massive impact. Ma'am, your testimony was that you pay above minimum wage, but you're capped by...
We are not capped, but we are paid Medicaid rates. So we can't exceed what we're paid in order to...
Of the Medicaid rates.
Exactly. So we can't, like other businesses that may be concerned about the bill, they can, at least to some extent, pass these things on to their customers. In our case, we cannot. We serve Medicaid clients. It cannot be passed on to them. So anything that doesn't cover its costs, we take as a loss.
Those rates are set at the federal level.
They're set at the state level.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That's what the clarification I wanted. Thank you.
Delegate Harrison.
Thank you. And I'm sorry I did not write your names down, but for from the DDA community and from the Medicaid, did you provide written documentation on your proposed amendments?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there, for our testimony, which is on Developmental Disability Coalition letterhead, there are 2 amendments that are connected to each other that are attached.
I'm sorry, I could have looked it up. Thank you so much. And Pastor HB 87 is making his way through to address the diapers and menstrual products as well. So not this committee, but another. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, seeing no further questions, I want to thank everybody. That concludes favorable with amendments. We'll now go to unfavorable. Kirk McCauley, Amy Rohrer, Andrew Griffin, Paula Udall-Levitt, and I thought my pronunciation? Awesome. And then James Stark. Paul, go ahead since you're already ready. Oh, maybe she's not. Sorry.
Not sorry.
You're good. Amy, whoever. Go ahead.
Okay, well, my name is Paula Udall-Levitt. I'm the Executive Director of Heart for Animals in the rural area of Garrett County. And one of the things that I have not heard brought up right now is rural. We are a nonprofit. We have 40 employees, And as a nonprofit, with that, we have an increase of $1.75 per employee, which amounts to us $9,000 a month or $108,000 a year in minimum wage increases. Our net income as a nonprofit for the entire year of 2022 was $8,000. So this increase will result in fewer low-cost and no-cost spay and neuters, higher prices for our underprivileged communities, and layoffs. If this is enacted, we are requesting an amendment that the state provide monetary relief until the year 2025 to those nonprofits with staff that does not receive state funding and will be unduly burdened by the accelerated timeline. Part of our mission is to provide accessible spay-neuter surgeries, operate a humane animal center, and shelter and adopt homeless animals is funded by private donations, fundraising, and small grants. Our clinic performs no and low-cost surgeries and emergency cares to our low-income households. Since 2009, our clinic has performed over 13,000 low and no-cost spay-neuters for pets in our underdeserved community. We support the current timeline. As a matter of fact, our two-year strategy is to gradually offset the costs of minimum wage increases based on the original 2025 legislation. Absorbing a $9,000 a month payroll increase will not be sustainable without increasing our prices, which affects our low-income families. This accelerated increase will likely lead to layoff of our staff and who are critical to our mission. On behalf of the Board of Directors of Heart for Animals, we urge you to consider the negative impact of public service we provide to our rural region. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kurt McCauley, WMDA, service stations, convenience stores. Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee. This bill might be sustainable by big business, but small business, it's a killer. A 14-employee business who was separated from the 15 and above in the original bill in 2019 would cost him in the first 3 months $10,348. Just the cost, minimum wage costs, it takes effect October 1st, go to December 31st. That's $10,000. Over the year, it's going to cost that same business $32,000, $32,614 in additional costs. I don't know where the small business is going to get that. They don't have the places to get it from. They're not big business. They can't take it from this section and give it to this section. It's gonna hurt some businesses really bad. It's gonna put some out of business, or they're gonna lay them off. And also, they're gonna start looking at AI really hard. And I know people poo-poo that, but it's already happening. There's going to be a point in time when labor costs meet AI costs, and AI is going to be the best way to go. It's just not good. It's inflationary. I mean, the only thing a small business can do is raise the prices to pay for that, and that is just adds to inflation. It's just a whole thing with the CPI. Right now, if CPI was in effect, it would add 75 cents to the labor cost right now. So CPI ought to be taken out of the bill, or at least reduced down to 3%, 2%, something like that. And that's it. Y'all have my written, so I won't bore you with any more. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Andrew Griffin here on behalf of the Maryland Chamber of Commerce. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to this bill. You have my written remarks, which address a host of points with House Bill 549, but I want to just touch on today specifically some of the safety measures which you heard as the bill was introduced, which are in the bill. The first, I think most commonly talked about, is the Board of Public Works, their ability to vote to pause the minimum wage if we're in bad economic conditions. I would urge the committee to consider something. A lot of the conversation around attaching this to CPI is to depoliticize, right? To have these slow automatic increases, to depoliticize the fact that you all have to come back here to raise a minimum wage however many years. I would urge you to consider that same thing for your off-ramp. By leaving this up to the Board of Public Works, it's simply a political vote and a political decision that 3 people have to take who answer to a host of people. It's unlikely they're going to vote to pause that minimum wage. Of the states that attach their minimum wage to CPI, most of them have off-ramps. Obviously, the Board of Public Works is unique to us here in Maryland. I would encourage you to consider an automatic trigger. We have them in other policies like unemployment insurance. Other states have them attached to unemployment insurance. What's currently in the bill, I would simply just recommend removing the BPW vote and having it automatically switch on or off for the pause and then the last thing I'll say is on the CPI. Of the states who attach their minimum wage to CPI, I encourage you to look at the caps that they have. The average cap for the states that have attached to CPI is 3%, not 5%. And so with that, I will pause. I'm happy to take questions. I have more comments in my written testimony. I appreciate your time.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee. My name is Amy Rohrer, here on behalf of the Maryland Hotel Lodging Association in opposition to House Bill 549. Hotels are making great strides in recovery, but the last few years have presented many challenges. Inflation, supply chain issues, and staffing shortages are among the issues that have hampered us, and real revenue recovery is projected to take several more years. In response to staffing shortages, 90% of hotels have increased wages in the last 2 years. On average, hotel entry-level employees receive a raise within 9 to 12 months of being hired. 80% of entry-level employees are eligible for promotion in less than 1 year. We're an industry that offers quick advancement and 200-plus career paths for those who wish to build a lifelong career. As minimum wages increased, this impacts starting wages for new employees without any experience and the wages for those employees who have received training, gained experience, and risen above minimum wage as a result. The impact of compression is huge in an industry that relies heavily on labor. My overarching point is this: hotels have already responded to market demands with increased wages in recent years. We have serious concerns with HB 549. Any unanticipated increase to minimum wage this year amid ongoing recovery will be difficult for most hotels to absorb. We're also concerned by the ties to CPI for automated increases, and we believe that passage of this bill would significantly jeopardize trust between the private sector and government. I'm joined by one of our members here today, and we urge an unfavorable report on HB 549.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jim Stark. I'm with the Best Western BWI Arundel Mills in Howard County. I was listening to some of the conversation earlier, and I sort of want to give you a real-world perspective of what this does to small business, more particularly in our industry, the hotel business. I've been at this hotel for 22 years. I've seen several ups and downs, obviously going through 9/11, then going through the financial crisis of 08, 09, and then this pandemic. And I can give you real-world accountability that any increase in the minimum wage will absolutely have compressionary factors that come into play that will absolutely increase our labor expenses. And in the hotel industry, we're just like hospitals. Hospitals and hotels, we're open 24/7. We never shut our doors. The day you open, you're there until the day you knock the place down. We have expenses that are exponentially increased, whether it's energy, supplies that we have to have for our guest rooms, linen, all sorts of things across the board we have to sustain. The pandemic beat us down pretty good. We're making a slow recovery, but a recovery. But when you lay on additional labor costs, and our labor costs have already gone up, and by the line item, that is our number one expense. And our labor costs have increased for a lot of reasons, but really it was free market economy that made us make the decision to pay more to have the staffing level that we needed to have to operate. And that's probably the biggest thing I want to leave today, is saying that the The free market economy dictated that to us and how we were able to sort of sustain and survive. And my employees are an extension of my family. Like I said, original owner since 1988. I've been there 22 years. That's how we treat them. So we don't look at this as just numbers. We look at this as having to keep the doors open and really trying to provide for everybody that works for me. And I have 44 employees. The second part of this is going to take effect this year, and this speaks for all hotels across the state. We've already given our budgets for 23 to our banks, to our lenders, to our investors. If this takes account this year, we have certain ratios that have to be met for debt service, for all of the mortgages that we have to pay. If we don't reach those ratios, if we don't achieve those ratios, they can increase our rates. They can demand that we put certain money in escrow. They can cancel a loan completely. So for reasons like this, I would encourage a unfavorable report on this bill.
Andrew, quick question for you.
Yep.
The caps, I only see two. One is California at 3.5%, the other's Minnesota at 2.5%.
I can provide you a list.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Delegate Howard.
I believe it's roughly 12 states, Mr. Chair, that have a cap.
Okay. Delegate Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're absolutely right. Trust is paramount, hence my line of questioning. The bill was already done between everybody had their voice. Andrew, my question goes to you. It's very interesting what you said, that we're depoliticizing this by putting in an index in inflation. And I find it interesting.
To a sense.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that we're not doing that on behalf of the businesses as well. Can you provide the committee, and if you can't do it off the top of your head, what one of those thresholds would look like? Because quite frankly, I agree with you. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, and I don't think it would be good for the private sector to have to come before the BPW or the legislature and try to ask for off ramps. I think they should be on or off switches. But if you could provide one of those, that would be, and I would be very interested. I don't know if you need to do it right this second, but I would be very interested in seeing some of those on-off switches.
I can. We have a list of the other states that have. Some are automatic, whereas an unemployment rate hits a certain amount, it automatically pauses. Some are you hit certain rates, and the labor secretary, for example, here may be required to issue a recommendation to the legislature. They come in various different forms, but I can provide those to the committee.
Yeah, definitely, and especially that one. I like that one because there's still a little bit of legislative accountability. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Andrew, please ASAP get us that information.
I will get it to you. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes this panel. Next we have Mike O'Halloran, Melvin Thompson, Brendan McDonnell, and Kaylee Locklear.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the House Economic Matters Committee. For the record, my name is Mike O'Halloran here today representing NFIB. Look, with all due respect to the governor and to his panel, small businesses are also struggling. I think you've heard that not only today, but I think you also hear it as we go forward and discuss the myriad issues that come before this committee. They're struggling with cost increases, they're struggling with labor and supply shortages, and frankly, small businesses are not asking for this, notwithstanding the handful of employers that were up here today who, frankly, by their own testimony, are telling you that they wouldn't even be impacted by this bill. In fact, 82% of NFIB members, when balloted, are telling you not to expedite the minimum wage increase, going back to an agreement that gave our smallest job creators more time to get to $15. You know, I think it's frankly tantamount to pulling the rug out from underneath them. And I'm not saying that, you know, this bill is brought forth, you know, with the intent to do that, certainly by no means. But the fact is, this bill is going to cost our smallest employers thousands of dollars in unanticipated labor costs that they did not budget for, they did not plan for, and it's all going to be done by the end of this year. And tying future increases to the CPI may actually act as a disincentive for employers to offer their own pay bumps and bonuses. Why? Because this bill tells them that their elected officials, frankly, know better on how to incentivize their employees with higher wages. These are the issues that small business owners care about and are asking you to consider. So for those reasons, we respectfully request an unfavorable report on House Bill 549. Thank you.
Good afternoon, honorable members of the committee. For the record, Kaylee Locklear here on behalf of the Maryland Retailers Association in respectful opposition to this bill. And although many large businesses have gone to $15 already, or pay even more than that to attract employees, not all businesses, and especially small businesses, have been able to do so. And that is why we believe the phase-in in current law for small businesses is still needed. And I've said this in other hearings, but employees truly have more bargaining power than ever, and the free market has been responding accordingly. This new mandate is just not needed. Many employers are paying more than ever they have before for labor, as there are now more job openings in the state of Maryland than humans to work in them. And most importantly, we oppose tying minimum wage to CPI, as many of my colleagues have already discussed. Regional inflation data shows growth in the statutory minimum wage has already surpassed the rate of inflation. A quick look at data on the Regional Consumer Price Index shows Maryland's existing statutory minimum wage has more than doubled inflation since 2000. The regular minimum wage for employers with at least 15 employees has grown 157% over the last 2 decades and grown 148% for smaller employers, compared to just 76% inflation over that same time frame. The bill before you determines CPI based on the immediate preceding 12-month period, which, contrary to remarks that were made earlier, are not predictable, as those numbers vary, rather than the straightforward increases we so carefully included in the existing law, and that does provide predictability for businesses. So with those comments, I'll end there, and we urge an unfavorable report.
Good afternoon. My name is Brenda McDonald. I'm from Deep Creek Lake, Mountain, Maryland, and Garrett County, in a rural area. Raising minimum wage from $13.25 to $15 per hour is an increase of 13.2%. How many employers can afford to raise the wages of everyone on their staffs? 13.2% in this current year. It is overwhelmingly likely that the mandated raises will be confined to those who are currently being paid minimum wage. The money for these increased costs must come from somewhere. Where are they going to come from? An obvious source will be increased prices for products of this, labor, which everyone will be purchasing and paying more. Not everyone will be receiving increased income to offset increased prices. In most circumstances, only earners in minimum wage, near minimum wage categories will receive wage hikes through the proposed legislation. Over the past 5 years, minimum wage in Maryland has increased from $10.10 per hour to $11.75 per hour in 2021, a 16.4 increase and 13.25 in 2023, which is a 31.2% increase. Average wages for everyone doesn't increase as quickly as minimum wage. No one can deny that inflation is a problem. Accelerating Maryland's $15 minimum wage hike and indexing inflation will not only result in similar increases, but overall average wages for everyone, but higher prices for everyone. You can see at the end of the line looming that large businesses will have a hard time also trying to survive with this, as so will nonprofits. Small businesses will disappear, no mom and pop stores, no favorite local restaurants or pizzerias like I own. You won't personally know anyone you buy from. Is that what you want for you and your families? Please do not make running a small business harder than what it is already. I'm in the customer service business, and I like it, and not in the self-service business. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Chair, committee members, I'm Melvin Thompson. I represent the Restaurant Association of Maryland, and we're also opposed to this legislation. Accelerating the phase-in of Maryland's $15 minimum wage will place additional burdens on restaurants and make it harder to fully recover from the pandemic, on top of higher food and product prices due to inflation and ongoing supply chain issues. Mandates that increase the cost of labor affect our industry disproportionately. The restaurant industry is extremely labor intensive and requires 4 times more labor per $1 million in sales than most other industry sectors. And with a narrow profit margin of just 4%, every $1,000 increase in costs requires an additional $25,000 in sales just to break even. Restaurant operators have already been forced to increase their menu prices due to inflation. Additional menu prices increases to offset the sooner than expected labor costs of this legislation could drive down customer traffic. Some restaurants may be forced to cut jobs or reduce work hours instead. And passage of this bill would also force employers to increase wages for their current experienced staff sooner than planned, as the starting wages would approach the wage levels of more experienced employees as well. And this would simply exacerbate the higher labor costs associated with this legislation and would do so faster than our businesses can handle. And for these reasons, we oppose this legislation and request an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Chair. So to the panel, the Augustine Commission gave us a report, and my question is going to be, are the themes of that Augustine Commission still apply today? So the conclusions that they had back then was that business owners viewed the state of Maryland as having a general disregard for the effect of regulation and just attitude toward their private businesses, that the state of Maryland had not nearly reached its potential, that much of Maryland's growth and economic development comes through virtue of being close to Washington, D.C., federal employment, both direct and indirect, which benefit Prince George's, Montgomery County, Baltimore City, and that we needed to improve our entrepreneurial ecosystem. That was the theme of the Augustine Commission through the lens of O'Malley, who drove heavy burdensome regulations, taxation after fees. And here we are today with a piece of legislation that has already been vetted by this committee not that many years ago on the heels of a pandemic. And I'm not persuaded with the governor saying that it's far enough in our rearview mirror that we can proceed with a bill like this. I believe that we're headed for a fairly significant and substantial recession, and that the businesses like the restaurants, like the hotels, are just now catching up after multiple years of very difficult economic times. Do you think this legislature is sending the right message by passing a bill like this now, given where we were just that few years ago when the Augustine Commission said, here is the problem with the state of Maryland, and then here's how we fix it?
I think the response to that from the small business community is to, warn this body, this committee, that this bill, whether it's House Bill 549 or whatever the bill number was in 2019 when this was instituted, these things do not happen in silos for business owners and job creators. In addition to labor costs, there are also insurance costs. There are banking concerns, as you heard from the hotel industry, the panel before you. So while it may be easy for some to look at House Bill 549 and say, hey, look, we're only talking about $1 here or $1 there, and as we look at CPI, it's only a few cents here or a few cents there. I would advise this body, as I believe the Augustine Commission looked at it in totality, that it is much, much more than just labor costs for employers. And I think they would also remind this body that when it comes to places to cut the budget line items, labor is more often than not, unfortunately, on that chopping block.
Thank you.
Delegate Howard.
Thank you. What is the gender or race of a robot? There isn't one, so we can eliminate that from the argument as we move forward in automation. How many births, weddings, or sicknesses do robots take? None. So we can eliminate that as we move forward in automation. That's one of my biggest concerns. I was at Sheetz months ago, and I ordered like the pretzel burger, and the girl came over and went, with my pretzel burger. I can invent a machine that does that, and we have. I want you guys to talk to me a little bit about what we've seen in the retail and restaurant, maybe on the national level, as far as automation is concerned, because at the end of the day, you know, that means none of us have jobs. So if you guys could expand on that, I'd be interested in hearing that. You know, one of the things Secretary Woot said was that there was no negative impact to the work sector. And I didn't ask the follow-up second bite at the apple question, but I wondered if that included automation. So if you guys could talk to me just briefly about that.
So if I may really quickly, because labor costs can account for up to 70% of a business's costs, ongoing increases will be devastating. And in retail, and I know many of you have already seen it, we're going to automation if we can to cut down on these costs. Grocery, talk about it a lot in this committee, 1 to 3% profit margin. So that's got to come from somewhere. And I think the last numbers that I saw said or estimated that there would be 73 million jobs lost to, potentially lost to AI by 2030. And I think with policies like this that increase costs for businesses, that's going to drive them to AI much faster.
Very quickly, does it concern any of you that, just, I'm sorry for the real quick follow-up, does it concern any of you that sales taxes and state taxes in some cases are included in the CPI? Seems cyclical to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and again, Mike had talked about this. This isn't the only increase that we're talking about here. I mean, we have unemployment insurance taxes, we have payroll taxes. All of these costs keep increasing. And we really thought that we had kind of negotiated in good faith here. We were going to 15, and we were going to look at the impact on the business community in the state. And then now we see a bill, and we're not talking about $15 an hour now. We're talking about a lot more than that. So major increases coming down the pike.
I agree. Grains of sand make a heap. Thank you.
Okay, we'll now go back to favorable witnesses who are virtual, and then there is one favorable with amendment. So Fran Teplitz, Mr. Teplitz, or Ms. Teplitz, once you are on, Ms. Teplitz, once you are on, go ahead and unmute and start.
Good afternoon. My name is Fran Teplitz, and I serve as the Executive Co-Director for Business Investing and Policy at Green America, and as Director of Green America's Green Business Network. I have lived in Maryland for most of my life, and for the last 20+ years have resided in Silver Spring. Green America is a national membership organization dedicated to harnessing the power of the economy, of businesses, investors, and consumers for social justice and environmental sustainability. Our Green Business Network includes nearly 100 businesses in Maryland, and Green America has 13,000 individual consumer members in the state. I am here to register support for HB 549, the Fair Wage Act of 2023. HB 549 is needed because we need a faster timeline for increasing the state's minimum wage by October 1st, 2023, and linkage of the minimum wage to the Consumer Price Index. Wage increases through minimum wage legislation in 2019 do not keep pace with inflation and the corresponding rising costs of workers' most basic needs. Now is the time to prevent economic backsliding due to inflation by ensuring that the minimum wage is tied to the Consumer Price Index. Montgomery and Howard counties have indexed their minimum wage, as do 19 other states. When workers cannot meet or barely meet their most basic economic needs while working full-time, something is wrong and Marylanders deserve better. Workers, of course, are also consumers. With more money, minimum wage workers can help strengthen the local economy and make possible additional job creation. Workers who help bring businesses to life and who are the most valuable asset to any business must be compensated adequately with protection against inflation. I respectfully request a favorable report on HB 549. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, we will now go to the favorable with amendments virtual. I have one, Amy Thompson. And go ahead and begin, Ms. Thompson.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman and committee members. Speaking on behalf of the Greater Ocean City Chamber of Commerce today, my name is Amy Thompson. I am the Executive Director, and I want to speak briefly about the HB 549. We are in support of the move to $15 an hour, largely because the market here in our region has already, in order to get staff, you got to pay them. So we're pretty much already there. So that's less of an issue, but we would respectfully request an amendment to the tie to CPI moving forward. To us, it seems problematic that's automated. It's potentially harmful to employers, especially small businesses. For those who are less able to absorb soaring costs, the cost of inflation, if it can't be passed on to consumers, they'll be in a position where they have to hire either fewer people, could increase the number of people in unemployment. As I think about the tools we have on a state level to control inflation, they're limited. And by making this an automatic update annually, it feels like we're playing whack-a-mole with one hand tied behind our back. So we respectfully request addressing an amendment to the CPI tie.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel and the bill hearing for today. Members, sit tight. We will have a voting session shortly following bill hearings. Thank you all.
Thank you.